knuckles run white with desire, the wheels of his Mustang exploding on the highway like a slug from a 45. True death, 400 horsepower of maximum performance, piercing the night. This is Black Sunshine.
Let's have a nice, civil discussion on pedophilia.
Well, okay. Amos has been having something of a time recently, shall we say. He's fled Singapore for the US and claimed asylum, which he's apparently been granted over free speech and other issues. But he hasn't found the West to be quite the haven of free speech and free inquiry that he perhaps thought that it was. He was kind of semi-invited, then disinvited, then barred from Mythicist Milwaukee, which had Sargon on to talk. Sargon did an interview with him afterwards, and he dug himself an even deeper hole on this whole issue. Dear God, this video is not going to get monetized, is it? And then he was invited to speak at Harvard, and then disinvited over the same thing. Every society has its sacred cows, topics that we are simply not permitted to discuss, I guess, and this issue is way up there at the top in terms of people's gut reactions of disgust and so on, and with good reason. So I used to be subscribed to Amos because I am a firm believer in free speech, and then I unsubscribed to him because he's just a shrill little edgelord who wasn't really bringing anything to the discussion. I didn't much like the style of his videos. I've recently resubscribed because I realised that I kind of made a bit of a mistake in doing that. Amos might not be necessarily the most erudite or intelligent arguer. Some of that's going to be language barrier and so on. And he is doing things for attention, I think. I don't think that's a controversial thing for me to assert. But he was challenging my principles and my beliefs, my strong core beliefs in free expression, the idea that reason can be applied to any problem, that anything should be open for discussion. And now he's found himself on the receiving end of all of this. And I did leave a message on one of his videos, as many people other than me did, saying that maybe this is a language thing, maybe you just haven't expressed yourself well. Can you take the time to really explain what it is that you mean when you talk about this stuff? And he did. So the least I can do is make a reply to that, taking him at his strongest arguments. So first things first, I'm going to try and express what I think Amos's argument is as best that I can. So what I think he is suggesting is that there is essentially nothing inherently wrong with underage sexual activity or activity between sexually mature individuals and sexually immature individuals, speaking in a purely physical sense. So when he talks about removing the age of consent, he makes a differentiation between that and abuse. So he's trying to say that the age limit shouldn't be the thing that is the defining characteristic, whether a relationship is legal or illegal or whatever else, but the nature of the relationship should be the determinant. So only exploitative, non-consensual, violent, etc. relationships should be punishable, not consensual ones, even if they breach that age divide. I'm going to get to all this, so bear with me. I'm just trying to state his argument as best as possible. So don't assume that I'm agreeing or anything at this point. The second half of his argument is that the way in which we treat people who are attracted to children is unfair and bigoted and prejudiced and nasty if they haven't actually done anything. Once they do something, provided it violates what he's already talked about, then, all bets are off. But he's saying that simply because someone is attracted to children, we should not necessarily be prejudiced, scared, however else you want to phrase it. We should not be horrible towards them until they actually do something. So those are the two strands of the argument that he's making, and which I'm going to attempt to tackle and reason my way through here. Well, one thing is certainly true. Consent laws are a mess. There is no universal standard, really, whatsoever. In my country, the age of consent to have sex is 16, to appear in pornography is 18. In the US, most places it seems to be 18. Some places allow younger with parental consent. There's some old laws on the books that contradict each other in some places. In mainland Europe, some countries accept consent as young as 12. Some places allow it so long as people are both young but within a certain span of each other. There is no broad overall societal agreement. Primitive societies running on religious law often take menses in women as being, old enough to bleed, old enough to breed, as the crude saying goes. And this is often justification made by Islamists for why child marriage is a-okay in their book, and so forth. So the law isn't really a lot of help here, because the law is pretty arbitrary. The best we can probably say is that it's post-puberty everywhere. And different regions of the earth, different climates, different diets and things, people mature at different rates. So puberty can hit at different levels. If I'm remembering correctly, the warmer the climate, the younger people tend to achieve puberty. The colder the climate, the longer it tends to take. This is no longer as true as it was. Is that relevant? Possibly. Maybe. Perhaps. The other thing we need to consider about the law is that it is a crude instrument, and that it is largely arbitrary. To a certain extent, we allow courts to twist and turn on judgments and interpret and so forth. Sentencing might be lighter or harsher depending on mitigating circumstances and all the rest. But when it comes to sex, we're fairly hard and fast in a lot of cases. Not all, but a lot. And much of it is very much dependent on the culture in which we find ourselves. Is that right? Is that wrong? I don't know. So the law's not a lot of help. So let's consider it from another angle. Why do we consider it wrong to have sexual relations with a child? And when do we consider childhood to have ended? Well, we consider it wrong for a number of reasons, I think. That there's a kind of a gut, visceral reaction, this is wrong, but this doesn't appear to be a cultural or historical universal. This seems to be a relatively modern occurrence that has roughly coincided with the advent of a proper childhood or a proper adolescence. It's really only since maybe the Victorian era, with the improvements to living conditions in many places and this idea of the innocence of childhood, that this has changed. And even then, in the poorer communities, you had 12, 15 people living to a room. There's no way those kids did not witness their parents having sex. So all of this has changed, and a lot of these considerations are very modern. And again, I'm not saying anything either way. I'm just trying to lay some kind of groundwork out here. So what can we say? Well, we can say that physically it is dangerous. Emotionally, it can be scarring for younger kids to engage in this kind of thing or to have this imposed upon them. We can say that we do not consider as a society that kids are developed enough to give informed consent, which is the same reason many of us argue that bestiality is wrong, because animals can't give informed consent. Yeah, and even then, some philosophers will argue, some moral and ethical philosophers will argue that an animal can consent. If it presents itself to you, then clearly it wants sex, but it's still considered wrong, and most of us find it viscerally disgusting. for a number of reasons. It violates the animal because it can't meaningfully consent. It doesn't have the intellect or self-awareness to do so. And it just triggers this disgust, this whole trans-species thing. There's worries about disease and so on. It viscerally strikes us as wrong. And that emotion similarly strikes us here, and it's a very hard thing to get past and to think about. It's worth considering also that this visceral reaction of disgust is similar to the one we have about incest, and it's similar to the one that many people have towards homosexuality. It's just a visceral, gut, raw, emotional reaction, one that has been blunted by cultural changes. So we can see how culture can be more permissive, or can slam down on these things and can make us more or less accepting of these kind of ideas. Ancient Greece was fine with pederasty. So we're walking around the issue here, and we're not really particularly getting anywhere other than the point of physical harm. Now that's a tricky one. The act of sex, the physical act of sex, can be damaging if the body is not mature enough, grown enough, or ready enough for it. But we can't pin that down to any one specific age. Like I said, puberty can hit as young as 9 for girls. Does that mean it's okay to fuck them? No, I don't think so. Does that mean they can meaningfully consent? I don't think so. There's probably outliers, particularly precocious young people who are ready for sex at much younger ages, but most won't be. And I think that's why we have the law where we have to, as this arbitrary line. Past this point, okay. Prior to this point, no. But bodies and minds are not numerical. We all develop at different rates. Our life experiences shape us in different ways. Some people will be ready for sex at 16 or 18, some people won't. Some people, some outlying tiny number, some minute fraction, may be physically and emotionally mature enough to handle it younger. Some won't be until older. But we've got to draw a line somewhere, and I guess that's where it comes in. We want to protect people from physical harm, from exploitation, from being exploited through the authority and so on that adults have over younger people just through sheer life experience and knowledge and position and so on. We want to protect children from that by having this line in the sand. Is it perfect? No. Are there problems with it, which Amos has pointed out? Well, yes, certainly. Could it do with being a bit more fuzzy? Probably. But should we get rid of it? No, I can't agree with Amos to that degree. We need something there, some line to help us judge. But I think maybe we should be a bit fuzzier about it. Alright, so let's draw a line under this part then. Past the gut visceral reaction that this is wrong, past the disgust that I think virtually all of us feel over this kind of thing, we can think and we can see the reasons that we consider it wrong. There's the threat of physical harm, there's the threat of emotional harm, and there is the worry that any such relationship is going to necessarily be exploitative. There are outlying cases where a younger person may be developed enough, precocious enough to meaningfully consent. So we can acknowledge that. We can also acknowledge that the physical harm, provided their body is mature enough to take sex, can be mitigated because we have contraception, we can avoid pregnancy, we have abortion, we can avoid pregnancy. And that is the major source of physical harm, provided someone is physically, sexually mature. So we can bypass that, but it's still a source of concern. The last major sticking point is the one of authority. A fully developed adult is physically stronger, more intimidating, has more knowledge, has more life experience, has more intelligence, has more emotional intelligence, it's more developed and capable in every way, and so the potential for exploitation is there. These are the same reasons that we frown upon or have codes against relationships at work between bosses and subordinates, between doctors and patients, between teachers and pupils, for the most part, why it's frowned upon. So I think, given all of these, we can see that there is a requirement or a necessity for there to at least be a case to answer in cases where someone who may not be physically, emotionally, psychologically mature enough to engage in this, we shouldn't necessarily find someone guilty. We should be fuzzy and wobbly enough about it to take individual cases into consideration, but we can draw a line where we can say, okay, beneath this age there is a case to answer. You must justify what is going on here because there is a threat of it being exploitative. That will vary by country where we think that it is. For me, I think 16 is a pretty good level. Now, personally, I lost my virginity at 15 to another 15-year-old. That will disgust some of you, I am sure. But we were both mature and capable enough, and there wasn't a big age difference. There wasn't an exploitative issue. So, in the circumstance that I'm describing, I don't think that should be a problem. That kind of thing should be okay, But that's where we're at here. I think there are rational, reasonable, logical reasons to be concerned about these kind of relationships, and I think I've laid them out fairly well there. The second half of Amos's argument is that we should not be horrible to paedophiles who haven't done anything. That's harder, I think. People naturally want to protect kids, and having someone around your kids who wants to fuck them, that's a lot to ask of anyone. Now, it is better, I think, if people are able to be open about who and what they are, and it's better to be warned that this is the case, I think. But it's a big ask for people, to ask them to be okay. I mean, would you be okay with someone living in your neighbourhood who was like, hey, I would really, really like to rape someone, but don't worry, I'm not going to. I understand that it's wrong. It's just I have this urge, and I really, really want to drag some poor woman into the bushes and fuck her while she's screaming. That sounds like a great thing to me. But don't worry, I know it's wrong. I'm not going to do it. Would you be comfortable with that? I mean, there are people who are into that as a kink, but rape play as a consensual activity between two adults who are just role playing. But I think there's a difference between that and actually wanting to do it. Just as there is a difference, I think, between, say, people whose kink is DDLG. Yeah, that's fine. Actually wanting to fuck kids, not fine. So would you be comfortable in either of those situations? I don't think anyone would, and it's massively unfair. It is. If someone has this desire but they don't act on it, we should be at least okay with them, but we're not, and it's understandable why we're not, because it's perceived as a threat, as a risk, quite rightly. But then we also have another problem in that we know that repression of desires often leads them to explode in other ways, to manifest in other ways. I mean, you need only look at how many people of bizarre sexual proclivities have joined the Catholic Church or other places to try and masquerade how they actually feel, what their desires actually are. I mean, I'm not joking here, but I think part of the reason we've seen so many male feminists get caught out like this is that they are repressing themselves, and they're engaging in this campaigning, this activism and so on, as a way of trying to convince themselves that they're good people, that they're not like that. I think that's why a lot of gays in the past, paedophiles in the present, so on, have joined the church. They think there's some kind of sanctuary there, some hope in God that will help them repress their desires, but in the end they just seem to come spilling out. And I think there's a good argument for what Amos advocates here, in that it's better to have these people out, not having to hide who and what they are, because that will relieve some of this psychological and emotional pressure. But I also think it's perfectly understandable why people aren't comfortable having would-be child fuckers in their neighborhood. So I don't know what the solution is. As long as they haven't done anything, there shouldn't be a problem. But it's like having a stack of dynamite outside your house. It hasn't gone off today. Yeah, it should be perfectly safe, provided it's not sweating nitroglycerine and no one's crashed into it or put a detonator in it. But you never know quite when it's going to go off, or if it's going to go off, and that's a constant present stressor. So I don't have any good solutions here. I will agree with Amos that it is unfair and perhaps not right that we treat these people in this way, but I think it's understandable that we do. I don't have a solution for this one. So far, I moderately disagree with Amos's first point, in that I can see where he's coming from, but I do think that we need some kind of line in the sand, though I agree we could be a bit more understanding and flexible around that point. And on the second one, I pretty much agree with him, but I don't see any kind of solution to the issue. I think there's too much risk, and I think it's unreasonable to expect people to ignore the problem. Well, on this last sort of part, I really violently disagree with Amos. Now, he has been suggesting that there should be no problem about child porn, in that consuming it, looking at it, uploading it, whatever, should be fine. Here I absolutely, flatly disagree, and that may seem odd given that I'm virtually a free speech absolutist. But here's the thing. When I apply my free speech principle, I do it under the auspices of the harm principle. Basically, any kind of speech should be fine up until the point that it causes harm. Consuming this pornography may not directly cause harm, uploading it may not directly cause harm, but producing it does. At some point in the chain, some child has to be exploited or fooled or spied upon in some way in order to produce that pornography, and by consuming it, by purchasing it, by sharing it, you are creating a market for that pornography, and that will feed and cause and create child exploitation. So when it comes to real, genuine photographic, video, whatever, pornography of children, no, that is not okay, because it meets the harm principle. So censorship on that basis is justified. We want to remove the demand. Now, I'm a bit more nuanced on that than just that, because the same kind of anti-child porn, anti-exploitation laws that are used to ban actual child pornography are also used against things like lolicon and cartoon children, 3D graphics that people have made depicting these acts. Is distasteful, creates that feeling of disgust again, but nobody is being harmed in that instance. They are drawings, they are depictions, they are graphics, even if they're photorealistic graphics. No one is being harmed. There is no reason why that should be banned, and indeed it may be counterproductive to do so. There is some evidence and a strong correlation that the availability of pornography drives down sexual assault and rape cases quite precipitously. And there's no real reason to think that it can't do the same for paedophilia and child exploitation. If the paedophile has some kind of safe, non-exploitative outlet for their desires, there are fairly good reasons to think that this will reduce the likelihood of them acting out in real life. So if they can have a wank over some Japanese comic about underage girls being attacked by tentacle monsters or whatever, maybe they can get it out of their system and won't be so tempted or so frustrated as to act out in real life. And people have already been talking about preemptively banning childlike sex dolls, real doll type things, but of children. It's not a person. It can't be hurt, it can't feel pain, it can't be exploited. It's not objectification, it's literally an object. But if that can help them work out their desires and prevent them acting out in real life as well, what possible rational, reasonable reason is there to deny them that? I don't see one. Some people seem to think that the availability of these things encourages people to act out, but from what I recall in my studies in pornography, and I don't think that there's any reason to think it'd be any different here, dangerous people are attracted to extreme pornography, but extreme pornography does not make dangerous people. So the kind of paedophile who is likely to attack a child, this is unlikely to make any difference. Those who are less likely to attack children, it may prevent them from doing so. But actual child porn of actual children, no. That meets the harm principle. Okay, this was way longer than I intended it to be, but I think it's important to speak with clarity and to make sure that you're understood when dealing with such a sensitive topic. So I'm going to recap once more, just to be absolutely sure everyone knows what I mean. Okay, Amos, I appreciate the fine philosophical point that you're trying to make around consent and so on, and dealing with such wibbly wobbly things as development rates and biology and so on. But I think you do have to have a line, even if that line is not hard and fast. It's one that should be there so that we can say, okay, caution, danger, Will Robinson. There's something there that needs to be explained. We need to check that it's kosher, that everything is above board. And that's why I think we need an age of consent. I think we can afford to be a bit more forgiving. I'll agree with you that far, but I think it still has value. I agree with you that it's unfair how we treat virtuous paedophiles. That's what they call themselves, isn't it? Verpeds. Sounds like some kind of weird alien race. But okay, I'll agree with you that it's unfair, but I don't know what to do about it. They're potentially dangerous. So what do you do? I don't know. I don't have any solutions to that. I agree it's unfair, but I don't know what you can do. Child porn, absolutely not. Cartoons and dolls, whatever else to help them cope, to reduce the offending rate, sure thing, but otherwise, no. So, yeah, this is way longer than I intended it to be, but like I say, it's important to get it all right. Hopefully people will listen to what I've said. Hopefully Amos will listen to what I've said here, and thanks for clarifying your position, though I still don't agree with you. I do think these kind of discussions need to be had and should be possible in this world. Zang.
Pretty fucked up. Pretty fucked up now.